Kande lives alone. He didn't always. He lived contentedly on Hebra Mountain with his brother and father, but his brother is away traveling, and their father is gone now. Kande alone has become something of a custodian for Hebra. Every day is the same, the mountain buried in snow, but recently something dark has spread on the mountain, something Kande doesn't quite understand. He tries endlessly to clean this gunk, but to no avail. Every day is the same, more snow, cleaning the gunk, and Kande alone in the bitter cold. Snow every day, until one day he sees his brother. He tries to follow along, but the storm picks up. He calls out, but receives no response. His brother has left him alone, vanishing into the storm. He chases until he can stay conscious no more, succumbing to exhaustion. Once again, Kande is alone. Until a small traveler with a strange, even smaller companion arrives on Hebra Mountain, waking Kande. Kande hasn't had company in so long, but these travelers are so small and the storms so vicious, so Kande invites them back to the warmth of his home to wait out the blizzard. She says her name is Zelda, and this little creature is Tri. They're so friendly. Kande feels he must help them. They're mending rifts, whatever those may be, and are trying to reach Holy Mount Lanayru. Kande knows this place. It's where his brother has ventured off to in his hot air balloon. Kande can at least guide them to the top of the mountain where his brother took off. Kande promises his father he will do a good job. Working through the gunk, they all make it to the summit. And then, his brother, big brother, is here. But he won't listen to Kande and even knocks him down. Kande needs some time alone. However, it is here atop the mountain summit that Tri can make an opening into the still world. A long journey from Hebra to Mount Lanayru lies ahead of them, one which, after some intense platforming around these stilled, frigid landscapes, will take them to the next dungeon. So, this is where Kande's brother went. Welcome to Lanayru Temple, which I personally prefer to enjoy as the game's final full dungeon. Since the lead-up is a bit more demanding than the other two, it is the most isolated dungeon in the game, technically being outside of the overworld map's boundaries, and thematically the lonely, cold atmosphere just feels right. Upon completing the game for the first time, I immediately labeled Lanayru my favorite dungeon in the game, though now after a couple of additional playthroughs, Pharaon might be nudging it out. Now that doesn't mean my fondness for this dungeon has diminished in any way, it's just that I've grown to appreciate Pharaon more with each playthrough. Lanayru is wonderful though, appealing to my tastes with its strong puzzle focus and beautiful atmosphere. This place has vibes up the wazoo. That was a sentence. The architecture is decent here. It's probably the weak point of the dungeon. It's a bit on the simplistic side, with the only real flair showing up around doorways, though there is still a strong visual identity with its cold blues, piles of snow on ledges, and ice everywhere. The walls seem to be either some kind of thick permafrost or blue stone, depending on the room. The architecture itself may not be anything to write home about, layout, but that doesn't mean the dungeon doesn't look great. It's just going for something a little more plain, but still detailed. The textures are littered with signs of wear and tear, scratches and cracks. There's also a slightly industrial element with these large fans and connecting power lines, which are visually distinct and play into the dungeon's puzzle mechanics, which makes the fact that they stand out like that all the more important. So despite the relative minimalism, this dungeon still looks fantastic if you ask me. The cold vibes are captured perfectly. I love the lonely atmosphere. The dungeon music is absolutely gorgeous here too. The first time I played through here, I found myself having to stop in the foyer just to listen and take in this song for a moment. The instrumentation is just perfect for the cold theming. Elden's theme had that energetic tango swagger. Faron's was layered with curiosity, pushing you to explore. This track, however, feels lonely but simultaneously hopeful. The track echoes and fades in and out, then crescendoing and falling again into bells and choruses that reverberate around. It feels mystical yet calm, optimistic and thoughtful, which fits for a more puzzle-centric dungeon like this. I implore you though, sit with some headphones and just give this one a listen sometime. Oddly, there's a few moments in this music that remind me of the Sanctuary theme from Spirit Tracks. Which, as we'll see, won't be the only element this dungeon seems to pull from the DS Zelda titles. Maybe it's just me hearing something that isn't there, but I swear there's a borrowed phrase in there, just with the instrumentation changed to fit the icy aesthetics of this temple. Progression through Lanayru Temple is substantially less exploratory than Faron. The dungeon has 5 floors, with most of them being relatively short, limited to a few rooms each. The exception is the large basement 3, which houses the bulk of the dungeon, and not coincidentally contains the most interconnected zigzaggy chunk of the layout, which will ultimately complete a loop back in on itself in order to complete the dungeon's final puzzle, whereas almost the entire rest of the dungeon is a pretty straight linear shot onwards constantly. As usual, we also have a few side-scrolling rooms. Despite that Elden felt the most like it was designed around this playstyle, I'm a big fan of how Lanayru implements them here compared to many other dungeons. There are only 4 of these rooms here in total. One of them is a one-off sort of room with a single entry, where you'll go in, complete a puzzle, and go back out the same way you came. The other 3 are reserved as bridging the gaps between floors, essentially just being playable extensions of these ladders, rather than connecting largely disconnected portions of the map horizontally. I know it's a minor difference ultimately, but I just prefer this approach. It makes more sense in my head structurally, allowing me to mentally keep track of the dungeon as a larger whole. Plus, I think this side-scrolling perspective lends itself well to adding more verticality to the gameplay. I don't think I could nail down any one room as being the dungeon's main central chamber this time around, but since this dungeon is far more linear, I don't see this as being an issue. You're not crisscrossing around here like in Faron, but rather you are continuously pushing forward, deeper into the depths of the dungeon as you make progress. That isn't to say that there are no forks in the road at all. The dungeon actually does have plenty of moments where you'll face a locked door, have to take a small small detour to solve a puzzle or find a key, and then return to a previous area and unlock a new path. But it isn't anchored to a central focal point that everything branches away from, and that's okay. Having a look at the map, I think the dungeon is of decent size overall, though I do wish it were just a bit longer once again, an issue we'll circle back to in a little bit. But for its size especially, this feels like an incredibly focused, tightly designed dungeon. It has a core concept and strong puzzle mechanics that it executes on wonderfully. So yeah, let's talk about that. The main puzzle mechanic uses a series of orbs that, when placed upon their pedestals, will activate one of the large fans found throughout the dungeon, with the fan being linked to its corresponding pedestal by these power lines. Depending on the state of the orb, which has either a fire or ice state, the fan will either blow heat into the room or cool it down. This can have all sorts of effects depending on the contents of the room these fans are in, most notably melting ice or freezing water, which can be used to open submerged areas up to exploration, or to create a layer of much needed solid ground to stand on or place echoes on top of. It's long-winded to explain this mechanic, but it is exceptionally intuitive in practice. The contrast between hot and cold is something that just about anybody can understand. Regardless, as easy to grasp as this is, the game still does a wonderful job of subtly teaching the player this puzzle mechanic without so much as a word or text box ever popping up on screen, and it does so with a slow rollout of the mechanic that starts out with very basic utility, then gradually iterating on the concept, with added wrinkles and complications as the dungeon goes on. The first puzzle has us bring the orb over to its pedestal, with the fan melting this wall of ice, allowing us to proceed farther into the dungeon. The next instance is in this room, where we can see a key below the ice, so we need to melt the ice in order to retrieve it. There's a cold air geyser placed here as well between the orb's spawn and the pedestal, so it isn't unreasonable that players might accidentally change the state of the orb and learn about being able to use it to cool a room that way as well. While you can make your way up to the locked door without doing so, it will be a lot easier if you revert the room back to its frozen state first, so that friction creates an incentive to try it out. We get another 2 puzzles in which we need to heat up the rooms in order to melt ice that's blocking the way, then the inverse, in which this switch puzzle will be leagues easier if we freeze the room over. Again, technically doable without freezing the water, but so much easier if you do. Finally, this all culminates in a big puzzle. There's a snowball that we must roll down this ramp in order to activate this big yellow switch. First, however, we must transport this orb in the western room to heat up this adjacent room so that the pedestal can even be reached. Then use the orb in this room, changing its state with the torch in here, to melt the icicles that block the snowball's way, then refreeze the water so that it can roll smoothly over to the big button. It's a great puzzle idea, with this mechanic being used in ways that continuously add layers of complexity, not just in the way the different states of the room must be used, but also in the obstacles it keeps placing in your path. The first orb we transport in a pretty safe room. The second one has a geyser. Pretty soon we get entire obstacle courses separating the orbs from their destinations, making simply transporting the orb a challenge in and of itself, as you avoid obstacles that will cause you to either drop the orb or accidentally change its state to the one opposite of what you actually want. And then finally having to complete an entire one of these orb puzzles to access the 2 main components of the bigger puzzle. There's such a wonderfully tuned sense of iteration and escalation here. I love this stuff. I just have one complaint. I want more. The sheer complexity this mechanic could allow for is fantastic. The issue is that when it starts to feel like they're really applying the pressure, really building something complex and thoughtful, the dungeon gives you the boss key and comes to an end. It's really just too bad that it isn't explored to its fullest. I think just one more large-scale puzzle would do the trick. I think back to how the Earth Temple in Wind Waker kept building upon its puzzle ideas with these mirrors, starting simple, arming your companion Medley with a light-reflecting object, then giving you the mirror shield, all building towards this one final, awesome multi-mirror light-reflecting puzzle that uses both characters to interact with it after moving several mirrors into place. The scale of it is awesome. That's what I want. A multi-step, large-scale puzzle that puts this hot-cold mechanic to use in clever ways, having us change the state of the room multiple times to move objects, push switches, all of that stuff. Don't get me wrong, I adore what's here. They crafted something truly special with this dungeon. It's just that it has left me hungry for more. Of course, there are more puzzles than just this core mechanic, such as the classic torch lighting style puzzle in this side-scrolling room. I really enjoyed this one, and several instances in which we need to use echoes to create bridges or stairs for ourselves, though the puzzle platforming aspect of things can be somewhat undermined in the same fashion that Jabul suffered from with regards to the water block. We'll be able to learn the cloud echo during the still world section leading up to the dungeon, and it is extremely versatile. It is literally a stationary floating platform that you can spawn, creating stairs through the air on the fly without solid ground as a foundation. This is especially overpowered during side-scrolling sections in which you can spawn it directly below yourself in midair. Who needs an infinite jump glitch when you've got cloud echoes? Credit where credit is due though. Within Lanayru Temple itself, they were pretty good about placing hazards such as these geysers, which will prevent total cheesability with clouds. Mostly. Regardless, I really appreciate having these additional little puzzles and obstacles. Sometimes these will be isolated, and sometimes integrated into other larger puzzles. This might be the dungeon in which I find myself using the bind ability the most, since the orbs require them to be transported, and you can use bind with objects in order to shield yourself from the hazards that are sprinkled throughout the temple. So far, while I've mostly talked about the puzzle aspect of the dungeon, there is still some combat worth mentioning. Mostly, the enemies in here act like obstacles to work past while transporting orbs, but a few times they'll have combat scenarios where they'll lock you in a room and have you fight it out. Among the most notable of these are the White Wolfos, granting you a formidable echo to add to your arsenal. Appearing here in this ice dungeon feels like something of a callback to the White Wolfos being the sort of boss of Ocarina of Time's Ice Cavern as well. Then there's the dungeon's mid-boss, which is apparently Slime Eye, making a return from Link's Awakening. Didn't recognize you there. I think I actually prefer this version of Slime Eye to its Koholint counterpart. You need to freeze and shatter it apart, and it will keep breaking into smaller, slimy voids as you do. All the while, it will try to remain warm using the hot spring in this room, and use said spring water to launch a scalding attack at you. It's a neat concept for a mid-boss, and reasonably challenging, I would say. It also happens to play into the hot-cold motif that is ever present throughout the dungeon too, and I think that covers most of it. So, once we've completed this excellent puzzle and gotten the boss key from that treasure chest that was just teasing you before, we can head down to the very bottom floor and confront the dungeon boss. With nowhere left to run to, we can confront the creature that we previously thought to be Conde's brother. This is Scorchel, like scorch, chill, like hot cold, scorch, chill. Anyways, scorch chill is thankfully an original boss. Mostly, I mean. We have technically never seen Scorchel himself before, but he is still clearly inspired by some pretty familiar elements. Most notably, the elements. Scorchel is what I call a dual element type boss, which the Zelda series has had many of in the past. The likes of Trinix, Twinrova, Phantom Hourglass's Gleeok, and probably more that I haven't even thought of. Though he may have the most in common with Fraz from Spirit Tracks, since he chooses to alternate between his fire and ice elemental states, rather than juggling both at once like the others I mentioned. Though of course he doesn't split apart into little guys like Fraz did, but hey, Slime Eye already covered that concept earlier, I guess. Visually, his design, when he isn't looking like the Metal Mario at home, also reminds me of the Uke from Phantom Hourglass, whereas Conde could be seen as something of a visual reference to the Anuki tribe, which were feuding with the Uke in that game. It's probably nothing more than a visual reference, though as a side note, Conde may have more in common with the Yetis from Twilight Princess, but we're getting off track. Scorchill's dual elemental style boss fight is done well here, and gives a good reason to actually employ echoes during the battle, by attacking him using the opposite element to what he is using, before yanking his helmet off with Bind and then dealing damage. Zelda has no way to use fire or ice attacks herself, so deploying echoes is more vital here than pretty well any other boss fight in the game. There's a pretty good combat flow to be had here too. Scorchel doesn't just take it lying down either. He retaliates with a variety of fire and ice attacks in multiple phases, initially just sticking to one element per combat cycle during the first phase, and then swapping between fire and ice on the fly during the second phase. His attacks vary from charging at you, spitting projectiles, and even these huge flame tornadoes, and even the room changes to adapt to which element he is using, which will cause those ever-contentious ice physics to show up if he's using cold attacks. So like with Slime Eye, it feels like this boss fight itself is playing into the dungeon's hot and cold mechanics. What a well-implemented thematic throughline. You've got to keep moving to stay safe, and keep your own echoes on him. I personally am partial to swapping between fire and ice wizrobes, but even elemental Keese will do the trick, which is good too because of the game's flexible dungeon order. You may not have gone up Elden by this point or encountered a fire wizrobe yet, but there is a single fire Keese that can be found within Lanayru Temple, which feels like a nice contingency so that no matter the dungeon order you do, you'll still have the means to be able to defeat the boss. This fight is so much fun. It's fast, frenetic, and feels like a perfect fit for this dungeon, carrying on that aforementioned thematic throughline that has been ever present in so many of the temple's puzzles right into the battle mechanics. It's not the first time we've had a dual elemental type boss like this, and it probably won't be the last. But I don't think I ever get tired of the concept. There's something just intuitive about it. Plus, when looking at the original bosses that they came up with for this game, rather than the returning bosses from previous Zelda titles, this may just be the best one yet. It might be my favorite boss in the game. So overall, just like Pharaon, Lanayru is a strong contender for being my favorite dungeon in the game. I'm still a little unsure of which dungeon gets to take that crown, but Lanayru makes a strong case, and it makes it well. This has surprised some people. After all, this is an ice dungeon, and I don't usually like slippery ice physics all that much. However, the ice spikes that you can find during the dungeon lead-up entirely negates this loss in traction, and rewards players with a great item if they explored the mountain thoroughly. So honestly, I forgot all about it. So my advice is get the ice spikes before this dungeon. Also, like Pharaon, I was surprised by the overall small key count. There are only 2 this time around, way fewer than it feels like, but they're used pretty flawlessly. Any more would be superfluous, since the dungeon tends to gate your progression with puzzles instead of keys, these big ice walls that need melting being the most common obstacle. Though I do think the cloud echo might make it a little too easy to cheese some of these sections, there's at least enough friction here that you have to be somewhat thoughtful about how you place them, rather than just spamming clouds until your problems are solved. Something that makes Lanayru even better is the way it actually fits into a larger whole with the other 2 dungeons that you can access at this point in the game. The 3 temples are named after the 3 golden goddesses, and for good reason. For the first time in the series, you actually get to interact directly with these 3 goddesses before receiving their sanctions. The 3 goddesses also have a close association with the 3 virtues of the Triforce: power, wisdom, and courage. These virtues are likewise reflected in the overall design principles of these dungeons. In Elden, we have power. The temple is in a deadly volcanic landscape and is the most action-heavy with its platforming focus. Pharaon represents courage with its heavy emphasis on raw exploration, especially having you push forward and explore in the pitch black dark. Lanayru, as I've talked about a lot already, is the game's most puzzle-focused dungeon, and of course, represents the virtue of wisdom. So not only do these 3 dungeons have their own environmental themes, but they collectively fit into one bigger picture, tempering Zelda to be worthy of the sanctions that she receives from these goddesses at the end of their respective dungeons. Above all else though, Lanayru just feels so tightly designed. We have a wide enemy variety, all of which perfectly fit the dungeon's theme, plenty of optional goodies to collect, including some fun hidden treasure in alcoves, and some of the game's most wonderful puzzles. I love some of the clever environmental context clues, like the hidden ladder below the ice blocks in this room. I probably would have found it anyways because I have fun using braziers to melt everything, but I could see someone having to stop in this room, halted by that locked door, and that torch being what tips them off. Alternatively, the dungeon at times teases you by letting you see things that you can't do yet, such as the layout having you walk through the room with this big boss key puzzle long before you're able to actually solve it. The dungeon's biggest and perhaps only shortcoming is the overall length. I wish it were longer. What is here is so good. I just want more of it. Just 1 or 2 more iterations of that puzzle, and I think the dungeon would be perfect actually, though I suppose it is pretty telling of the overall quality that me just wanting more of it is my biggest critique of the place. Lanayru Temple is one of the best dungeons we've seen in recent years. From the atmosphere to the music to that lovely puzzle design, this is a great dungeon through and through. Before we wrap things up with Echoes of Wisdom, there's one final section of the game I'd like to discuss, one that, while brief, fills the role of the game's final dungeon. So, this is your spoiler warning. From here on, we're talking about the end of the game. But first, a bit of context. During Zelda's quest to close the rifts and receive sanctions from the 3 golden goddesses, we learn a few vital bits of information. Information that reframes how we can view the entire series. In the beginning, Null existed in the void, devouring all things that would attempt to take shape. The goddesses created the world to contain Null. Hyrule is a prison. The rifts we have been closing are Null's attempts to return the world to the void. Null is the name of our enemy, and we've seen them before. Remember that creature that captured Link after our battle with Ganon at Hyrule Castle? That was Null. But Null isn't a mindless beast. They've been waiting to enact their plans. With the 3 sanctions bestowed upon Zelda by the goddesses, Null creates an echo of Zelda herself in order to lay claim to the prime energy that we heard legend of. After completing a puzzle in the Eternal Forest and a quick exchange with the Great Deku Tree, we can pursue this echo. The prime energy is in fact the Triforce. However, Null's heart is not in balance, and as we know, this means that they are unable to lay claim to this awesome relic. Instead, it splits, with Null receiving the Triforce of Power, Zelda receiving Wisdom, and Courage being sent into the Still World to seek out and reside within Link. Null seeks to reunite the 3 pieces of the Triforce, and it's up to Zelda to pursue her echo. So for the final time, we venture into the Still World, but this time to put an end to things once and for all. After the longest Still World platforming section yet, one which combines elements from all previous dungeons, we'll have to battle our own echo and rescue Link. This is a great little pre-dungeon boss fight. Loads of fun. Working together, the hero of legend and priestess of wisdom must enter Null itself in order to stop this entity's cycle of destruction. And this brings us to the game's final dungeon, Null's body. We're in the endgame now. There's no turning back. Inside Null's body is the short but climactic finale for Echoes of Wisdom. The dungeon itself feels organic and otherworldly, fitting for the inside of this eldritch, primordial being. Null has been devouring bits of the world for ages, and pieces of buildings and trees that are being slowly digested can be seen all over the place. Not only that, but the faces of the countless tries that Null has consumed are too visible in the walls and floors. Barriers and fences look like bone, horns, or whatever the equivalent to blood vessels would be in such an ancient being. Maybe even strands of Null's DNA. The music in here takes elements from the usual Still World theme and infuses them with what I could only describe as a haunting lullaby. It's eerie, off-kilter, and absolutely perfect. There's just something so creepy about the whole place, like something just isn't quite right. The main draw of the dungeon has us working together with Link to solve puzzles, defeat enemies, and move forward. Mostly the latter. Initially, you'll be fighting together, but then they start separating you into different rooms, forcing you to lean on your echoes to fight for you. Since you've returned Link's weapons to him before entering Null, you can't make use of sword fighter form anymore, so you've got to get creative with what you've got. Or spam Lionels. The puzzles in here are decent. A couple of platforming challenges, activating switches, the usual stuff. The best of the bunch shows up in this room, in which Link is on one side of the room, and you need to use either echoes or bind to help him reach the switch and open the way forward. It's a neat little puzzle. The downside is that that's about all there is to this place. I hate sounding like a broken record, but I'm going to say it again anyways. I like the concepts that they've introduced, and there's a lot of great gameplay potential to be had here. I really enjoy working together as a team with Link. I just want more of it. For this being the end game, I never really feel like I'm being pushed to my limits. We only really get a couple of puzzles, combat scenarios, and hallways before we're staring down the drop into the boss arena. Essentially, the dungeon is just too short. And that's my only complaint really. It's okay that it's so linear since it's this climactic build up to the final boss, but there's barely any of it. I mean, look at the map of this dungeon compared to even Southern Ruins, the game's first dungeon, As I said though, I do really like what we did get, even if there wasn't enough of it. The vibe in here is just the right amount of creepy. You really feel like you're venturing somewhere that nobody was ever meant to see. It's a little gross, but it works. So after not too long, we'll reach this final drop, one that feels like a direct callback to the windfish's egg. Dropping down, we'll be taken directly to the game's final boss. It's time to confront Null. This battle is incredible. It might be one of the best final bosses in the series. Null looks great. Like this being is trying to take on the form of the many tries that it has been devouring without fully understanding them. Just like we've seen dark echoes of Link and Zelda, this could be seen as Try's evil counterpart. It looks fleshy, the arms having exposed tendons and a hard shell that gradually breaks apart over the course of the battle. Null feels like something completely out of this world. We've had more than our fair share of familiarity in this game, which I've liked, but I find the callbacks and reused bosses easier to enjoy when they're balanced with fresh and interesting ideas, which is on full display with Null here. Null will summon many creatures to fight for it, including previous bosses that we faced, and constantly will try to lash out with its claws, or even grab and restrain you. The fight emphasizes teamwork though. When you target and use bind on one of Null's many arms, for example, Link and your own echoes that you summon will prioritize attacking that target, allowing you to direct the flow of the battle. And Link is an absolute unit in this game. They did not nerf my boy. I've seen a lot of folks expressing their distaste for not being so directly involved in the battle, but I just don't see it. You have to constantly stay moving to avoid the barrage of attacks. You can dictate both what Link and your echoes target, or use bind to pull Null's limbs into Link's sword range. And there are side-scrolling portions of the battle where you and Link get entirely separated. The battle is hectic. There's such a frenetic quality to it, and I love it. Zelda herself has been an active participant in the final battle a few times before, and I've always enjoyed that more than when she's just a passive observer on the sidelines. This feels like the ultimate evolution of that concept. Link is here with you, but as Zelda's support this time, as we take the reins and control the flow of battle. Then there's the music, this wonderful, beautiful music. It starts with this tense version of Null's theme, which works for that first phase. But when we move into the final phase of the battle, and as Null grows weaker and we have the upper hand, an emotional piece takes over, drowning out Null's theme. It has elements from the main series theme, from the game's main theme, and Zelda's lullaby all mixed in together. It is wonderful, and such a perfect climactic way to cap off this fight. Finally, after enough limbs are severed and Null's shell broken apart, we'll see it, that sacred golden triangle that Null stole. For one last time, with Link's help, we can use bind to pull it. Wisdom and courage united to overpower this ancient evil, extracting that final piece of the Triforce and bringing Null itself to an end. Emotional goodbyes and pleasant hellos are exchanged, and the threat has ceased to be. I love this finale. There's no Deus Ex Machina, there's no contrivances. Everything from the power of the Triforce being able to mend the land, to everyone being shocked that Link can speak again, to Tri saying that they feel thank you. All of it stems from things the game has taken the time to establish and build up to. This may not be a perfect game, but this might be a perfect ending. Before wrapping things up, I do want to make a note and address something. Over the course of this series, I've been told that I've been far too charitable towards this game and its dungeon design, too generous with my praise, but I really do mean what I say. I hold the Zelda series in the highest regard, but I have always tried to approach my critiques of it in a fair and honest way. Despite loving Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, I did not shy away from being critical of some of its design choices, because I know what that development team is capable of. With Echoes of Wisdom, however, this is Grezzo's first attempt at an original Zelda title. This dev team previously has only worked on remakes, notably Ocarina of Time 3D, Majora's Mask 3D, and Link's Awakening. But it's clear to me that they care a great deal about this series. Making a good Zelda game is no easy task, but I'm willing to give Grezzo the benefit of the doubt here. This is a small studio working on one of the biggest gaming franchises of all time, and I think they have a serious handle on what makes this series so special. So I want to say thank you, Grezzo, for this wonderful, charming little entry in my favorite series. So, this is a wrap on the dungeon design of Echoes of Wisdom. As my plans stand right now, unless Nintendo decides to throw another surprise Zelda title our way, we'll be taking yet another look at some non-in-house developed Zelda games. So join us soon when we look at the dungeon design of the Oracle games, which I've been really looking forward to digging into. But for now, I'd like to say thank you so much for watching. I'd like to extend a special thanks to Pixel Fusion Productions for his help gathering the absolutely beautiful FreeCam footage that I've used through this series, the Dream Shrine for providing me with rips of the dungeon maps, and of course, my lovely patrons and YouTube members who support this channel. You all are awesome. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a lovely rest of your day. Bye-bye.